Well, this stinks. The Baltimore Ravens lose Mike Macdonald to the Seattle Seahawks. Macdonald signs a 6-year deal to become Seattle's next head coach. We talk about the fallout from the move, initial replacements, and so much more coming up on this Instant Reaction live edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here in this time of morning, I guess, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube. You can like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, wherever you get your shows, you can tune in anywhere, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and it's the same show, both audio and video, so you're not missing out on our 5-day-a-week plus bonus content like today, Ravens content. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets if your best bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We have this for you all off season, all as we lead up to the 2024 season, but it's going to be some things like this because the Ravens were so good. We knew they were going to lose some players, some coaches. And I know there was hope that Mike Macdonald would have stayed in Baltimore, but the reason we're doing this instant reaction stream today, which we do, by the way, after every single piece of Ravens big news, is Mike Macdonald officially leaves the Ravens, goes to the Seattle Seahawks. And these live shows are a way to engage with the chat. And if you want to mourn in the chat, you want to put out your frustrations, your sadness in there, we're going to try to maneuver through this. We'll talk about just the overall optics of Macdonald leaving. We can talk a little bit about John Harbaugh, too. It's a very spicy conversation, by the way. We'll also talk about why Macdonald decided to leave right now after we saw guys like Ben Johnson return and Bobby Slowick, etc. And also in the final part of the show, we'll get into initial replacements, which we will also talk more in depth about tomorrow on tomorrow's show. And we also had a show come out today with Sean Merriman, former All-Pro linebacker. We talked a lot about the Ravens, the Chargers, MMA, his background. So be sure to check that one out as well. Let's see. We have Zepia saying he became an op. I mean, I'm happy for him. I'm not happy he left Baltimore, but look, he earned it and he deserved it. But it would have been nice to see him return. Jin saying we're cooked. It hurts. I wouldn't say they're cooked, though. I see Matt T saying, Kev, say something to make it all better. Okay, here. Let's just start with the silver lining first, and then we'll get more into the, oh, man, Macdonald's really gone here. The fact that it happens now for the Ravens, it's better than it happening, let's say, next week, when we know there's so much interest in the Baltimore coaching staff, like Anthony Weaver, Denard Wilson. And I know Greg Lewis is a defensive coach, but Greg Lewis, too, Zach Orr. No, none of the Ravens' assistants have left yet. So Macdonald leaving now, of course, he'll probably bring some guys over, right? The Ravens will have one defensive coordinator for next year, whether it's Weaver, Wilson, or whoever. We'll talk about that. But if this had happened next week, and let's say Denard Wilson already left for the Titans, and Zach Orr left for the Packers, and Weaver left for the Commanders, you would have lost everybody, and you would have to really say, oh, man, what are we doing here? So it's terrible. It stinks Macdonald left. It's a sad day here in Baltimore from a Ravens perspective. But I think if you look at the one silver lining, if there is one, if I'm trying to come up with one, it's that it happened now and not later. Jace asking if there are any in-house suggestions right now, or are we looking outside the building? We'll talk about that more in the third segment, Jace, so stick around for that. But initially, I would say just go in-house. You want to keep the system. And you have a bunch of really good candidates who I just listed off, Weaver, Wilson, Orr. So I would do that as well. I see a lot of crying emojis here in the chat as well, which I think embodies a lot of Ravens fans right now. It embodies me. I mean, I'm sick about this. And I think part of it, too, is, I mean, we can kind of talk about it, right? Where for Baltimore, if they had won the Super Bowl and Macdonald had left, I think it would have been, it would have been a little easier to swallow, I guess, right? Of course, again, I'm still happy for him. He deserved this opportunity, but it just stings now, right? That Macdonald isn't going to continue what he started or finish what he started in Baltimore. And look, He got a 6-year deal. This is a big opportunity for Mike Macdonald. I'm not trying to bash him for this, but I do know that, again, with what we saw with Ben Johnson yesterday, him staying in Detroit, Bobby Slowick staying in Houston, even Gerard Johnson, who's a quarterback coach, he was getting offensive coordinator looks, and he stayed in Houston. It does sting that Macdonald left, but you can't bash him for doing what Patrick Queen said, right? This is, in his opinion, what was best for him and his family. It stings, but you don't know if you're going to be a hot candidate next year. You don't. You sometimes just got to take advantage of the opportunity, and that's what it is right now. I've seen my alarm went off because I knew something like this was going to happen, and I needed to make sure I was aware for it. So I kind of had a feeling that this was going to happen today. But in terms of, I see Majin Bull here saying, knowing the Ravens will likely limit themselves to in-house candidates once Harv's finally is going to make this suck even more. Owner is having to look well run at the expense of actually being it. Oof, wow. So let's dive into this here comment. I think a lot of people right now are disappointed that it was keeping John Harbaugh. It would have been one thing of, right, you keep John Harbaugh for another season, you bring back the coaching staff, you run it back, and if it doesn't work, you have that contingency plan. And hey, we know we can promote Mike Macdonald to the head coaching position, and then, okay, fine, right? You give it the extra year, it doesn't work, fine, you go that way. Where people, at least my sense, is where people are most frustrated about this whole thing is the fact that now you don't have that anymore. And maybe Anthony Weaver, he comes in, and if he's the hire, or Denard Wilson or someone else, he comes in and they do the exact same thing and figure it out. But look, to me, if you had to ask me right now, who would I rather have as head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, John Harbaugh or Mike Macdonald? The answer, both short-term and long-term, for me is Mike Macdonald. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to John Harbaugh. I know some people are, but I'm not. I think Harbaugh is a good NFL coach, but I do think that, as I've said, good things, if you talk about the Ravens' tenure, and I know some people might not think it's good, but good things sometimes just don't work out for a long time. For John Harbaugh, we're at a long time, and the Ravens have had, 2 playoff wins since they won the Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. They progress and they win the AFC Championship. And here's been my thing with Harbaugh, right? They were never going to fire him after making the AFC Championship game, regardless of how you felt about it, regardless of how I feel about it. Them making that step, they were never going to move on from him. And it now comes at the expense of probably one of the brightest, if not the brightest, defensive mind. And people are saying, oh, well, he's not an offensive guy and the NFL's moving to young offensive head coaches. I don't really care about that stuff. Macdonald's a stud. We all know Macdonald's a stud. And I think for the Ravens, you sometimes have to make tough decisions here where you have a good head coach. You have one. Like Bill Belichick, really good head coach, the best head coach of all time. And the Patriots move on from him because they know it's not working. Look, I know Belichick didn't like his seasons after Brady, et cetera. It's not the exact same situation. If Harbaugh had had these losing seasons, I'm sure the ownership would have moved on and Steve Bisciotti would have moved on. But I just, it is not, I don't know how to really say it. It's not justifiable for me to say, hey, look, the Ravens, they made the AFC Championship. You have this young coach. Because, look, I'm a big Anthony Weaver fan. I like Denard Wilson a lot. I think Zach Wilson's awesome. Or Zach Wilson. Zach Orr, excuse me. But I don't think that, you can just guarantee, they're going to come in and be the next Mike Macdonald, even though the system, if they go in-house, which I assume they will largely remain the same. So we'll see what happens. I see we got some Seahawks fans in here. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope to give you the insight on Mike Macdonald. We'll talk about who Mike Macdonald is a little bit in the second part of the show. So if you're a Seahawks fan and want to know a little bit more about Mike Macdonald, you can stay tuned for that. George saying, I hope Zach gets it, or Zach Orr gets it. Best of luck to Mike. Let's see. Some of us Hawks fans wanted us to pick up Jim Harbaugh. Now we get the best of Jim and John. Yeah, I mean, this is the best of John. I mean, that's a good point. It really is the best of John. The Harbaugh coaching tree expands again. And I see all in the chat here, Seahawks fans are absolutely buzzing right now. And I think at the expense of it, obviously, the Ravens fans, people who cover the Ravens, obviously know how big of a loss this is as well. I see OD Death Metal. I wonder how many coaches he takes with him. I would assume multiple. I would assume whoever doesn't get the Ravens DC job, at least one of them will follow Mike Macdonald and become Mike Macdonald's DC. For example, D'Amico Ryans, right? D'Amico Ryans went to Houston last offseason. Bobby Slowick was his hot offensive coordinator candidate. And he ended up taking the offensive coordinator job in Houston. So I would assume if the Ravens give the job to Denard Wilson, Anthony Weaver will go with Mike Macdonald and become his defensive coordinator. If Weaver gets it, I think Denard Wilson, he'll go elsewhere, whether he has a lot of options. I think Weaver, really, it's Miami or Seattle. But I think one of these coaches is going to want to follow Macdonald because they know the system and they can install that with their groups as well. Mike saying any word on the OC change? It would be nice to have Lamar to have some consistency at offensive coordinator. I mean, Macdonald's not leaving, Mike. I would be shocked if he does. He's going to stay here. So in terms of stability for offensive coordinator for Lamar, that's going to happen. I think Macdonald. I keep saying Macdonald because I want him to stay. I think Monken stays. But yeah, George saying Monken isn't going anywhere, and neither is Harbs. Last time we lost an AFC Championship game, we won the Super Bowl the following year. Another silver lining. George has it right there. So Baltimore has tough decisions ahead. This is a big blow to the Ravens. I could sit here and I could sugarcoat it, but I'm not going to do that, right? It's not what I pride myself on. When stuff is going well and something good happens, I'll talk about it being good. When stuff is not good, I will talk about it not being good. This is not a good day for the Baltimore Ravens in terms of losing, again, in my opinion, the brightest young mind in the NFL. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll continue talking about Macdonald, what he brings to the Seahawks, and why Macdonald left right now. Why didn't he come back to the Ravens and finish the job, or at least try to? So be sure to stay tuned for that. We have a ton to get to on this episode of Locked On Ravens as we continue to react instantly to Baltimore losing Mike Macdonald to the Seattle Seahawks, him going there on a 6-year deal to become the Seahawks head coach. First, this episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. And passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts, your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items, all the exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We're back to our second segment of Locked On Ravens, instant reaction live. Kevin Oestreicher taking you through and talking you through, hopefully being a therapy session for you. Mike Macdonald leaving the Baltimore Ravens, going to the Seattle Seahawks. Really tough day, tough blow for the Ravens. As I round out that first segment, they lose one of the best, in my opinion, the best young, bright minds in the NFL. Baltimore now needs a new defensive coordinator for the second time in 3 seasons. Don Martindale leaves, and Mike Macdonald comes in for 2 years, and now he graduates, I guess, goes to Seattle. Seattle, I think, is a really good spot for him. I think when there were conversations early about Macdonald and where he could fit, where he could go, people were kind of worried because with head coaching opportunities, sometimes it's not the best fit for you as a coordinator to move on and go to maybe a worse organization. The Ravens are notoriously one of the better organizations in the NFL, right? People regard them as one of the best in a lot of different categories. So for, let's say, it's new ownership, right? But the Commanders, a history of not being the best, then people were saying, well, why would Macdonald go over there when the history of the Commanders, and again, it's new ownership, so I don't want to just group them into what it's been, but he's like, why would you go there if you're Mike Macdonald when you can stay in Baltimore? But I think Seattle's actually a good spot for him. I think they have a lot of good defensive personnel there. I mean, Devin Witherspoon is great. I know there have been some conversations about maybe the Eagles trading for like a Reek Woolen, but I don't really see that happening. You have solid guys over there in Seattle, and you can build upon that if you're Mike Macdonald and kind of take the reins here. And for Macdonald, again, there's no guarantee you're in this position again next year. If you're a quarter, that's why I think what Ben Johnson is doing is honestly so unconventional in terms of him returning to Detroit after being such a hot head coaching candidate 2 off seasons in a row, because there's no guarantee for Detroit that offense is good again next year. And then Ben Johnson is saying, oh, wow, well, all right, now I'll just go and get a head coaching job. But everybody's like, no, I don't really want you anymore, Ben Johnson, because your offense wasn't good. So for Macdonald, look, we have to be realists here. The Ravens are going to lose some talent on the defensive side of the ball in the offseason. I'm not saying the Ravens defense with Mike Macdonald in there would have been any worse than it would have been last season. But look, we have to assume maybe Patrick Queen follows Macdonald to Seattle, or he would have left anyway. We have to assume that maybe Geno Stone gets paid a lot of money to go and be a starting safety somewhere, or Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy maybe go elsewhere. Justin Madubuike, right? He's the big name. I see in the chat Justin Madubuike a lot here. The Ravens defense, maybe they get injured a lot more. The Ravens defense got pretty lucky with injuries in terms of season-ending ones, all things considered throughout this. I know Marlon was hurt for a while. Marcus Williams was hurt for a while. They had injuries here and there, but nobody was lost for the season outside of David Ojabo. Maybe they lose guys for the season next year, and Macdonald's defense is nowhere near as good because they just don't have the talent level, or they lose a key guy for the year. And then it's the same thing I'm talking about with Ben Johnson. Maybe Macdonald's is like, all right, now I'm going to go get a head coaching opportunity, and people are like, organizations are like, I don't really want this anymore. So you have to take advantage of the opportunity in anything. If we just talk about life in general, right? Taking advantage of opportunities, you could argue Macdonald's value was never going to be higher after having one of the best defensive seasons in Ravens history. And he took advantage of it. And I don't blame him for doing that. It stings, especially because of what happened with the Ravens and how their season ended and how disappointing that was. And now it's almost like a double whammy, right? You don't win the Super Bowl, and now you lose arguably your best coach. In fact, I think Macdonald was the Ravens' best coach. So I see Big Germ saying this will go down as the biggest mistake in Baltimore Ravens history. I think that maybe in 10 years we look back on that and look, maybe it's the case, maybe it's not, but I think Macdonald's going to thrive. And the fact that now he enters a division in the NFC West where the Cardinals are rebuilding, it's San Francisco's division right now, right? But I think Macdonald has the opportunity to really build that Seattle team up and give the pieces he wants, the coaching staff he wants, and the Ravens system's going to go follow him over there as well. Lincoln's asking, why did we not re-sign him? Sometimes it's just about opportunity. I mean, the Ravens weren't going to move on from John Harbaugh after making the AFC Championship game. Whether you believe it was the right decision or the wrong decision, they just weren't going. I'm the messenger, right? They weren't going to do it. So if Seahawks, which they did, offer Macdonald a 6-year big money deal, if you're Mike, you put yourself in Mike Macdonald's shoes, right? Another year as the Ravens defensive coordinator, great position, chance to win a Super Bowl, and defend. Maybe you give him a raise if you're the Ravens, right? Or you have the opportunity to go be a head coach, get that 6-year deal, get that big money, and you get to kind of have control over some stuff. Some people would pick the Ravens. Some people would pick Seattle. Mike Macdonald picked Seattle there as well. Now, George saying, Marvin, Rex, Pagano, we've lost a lot of greats and have been fine. I agree. I'm not saying this is the end of the road for the Ravens. I'm not saying losing Mike Macdonald ends their Super Bowl window. I do think that whether it is Anthony Weaver, Denard Wilson, or one of these guys, that there will be maybe a little bit of a drop-off, but it's not going to be this end-of-the-world best defense in the league to worst defense in the league. I do not see that happening. So there are still options, and we will get to those options first in the final part of the show, and then we'll do a show tomorrow, 6 a.m., about initial candidate replacements and the best options for Mike Macdonald replacement. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, by the way, a little shameless plug in there. And I see, again, we have a lot of people. I apologize for not getting everybody in the chat. This is a huge stream, and I appreciate everybody for their support and tuning in. If you like the channel, if you like the content, be sure to like the video on YouTube, subscribe to the channel in both video form and audio form. It's the same show, by the way. So I think when you talk about also the Ravens and their trajectory as a team right now, I think it's just a lot of bad happening at once for the Ravens, right? They lose this big game. They arguably probably should have won if they just stuck to their identity. They lose Mike Macdonald, who, it would have been one thing. And again, I don't think this would have been fair if it happened. But if Mahomes and the Chiefs just put up like 35 on Macdonald, people would have been like, oh, well, okay, well, he can't step up in the big moment. But I saw a comment by Majin Bull saying Macdonald deserves zero blame. Don't be mad he isn't indoctrinated. Yeah. I mean, I agree where Macdonald for the Ravens, I'm not blaming him whatsoever for one taking the job, but I think that the fact that he showed up in the second half, his defense showed up, the halftime adjustments, I think that's what makes people well, it's one of the things. There are a lot of things that make people upset about this, but I think Macdonald has a bright career ahead of him, and Macdonald has this. I mean, let's just pull up some of the stats from Macdonald's tenure here. We'll do this season. Starting off, well, I'm in 2019 for some reason. I do not know why. I'm going to get to 2023 quickly. But Macdonald was one of these guys where he had the best pass defense in the league. We know that. But the run defense was a little more inconsistent than, maybe you would have liked if you're the Ravens. But I don't think it's that big of a deal because we saw his aggressiveness pay off. But it's not like Don Martindale aggressiveness, right, where you live and die by that blitz. Macdonald was calculating his aggressiveness, and he fits in I think anywhere, because look, he's not going to have Kyle Hamilton in Seattle. I know Jamal Adams is their do-it-all safety, which again, I'm not a big Jamal Adams guy personally. Sorry about that, but I'm just not. But you can utilize personnel to your advantage. You bring a Patrick Queen over there, right? Maybe it happens for him. And I see, imagine saying the angering thing is if we were one and done in the wildcard divisional round, Harbaugh would be just as secure. Stop saying the organization is becoming complacent. They already are and have been. I mean, I understand that. Now, honestly, if the Ravens had lost in the wildcard divisional round, there would have been no justification for me whatsoever. Like, it's not that I agree with it. I understand where they're coming from in keeping John Harbaugh. I personally don't necessarily agree with that. But if they were one and done again, there was no way I would have justified the Ravens keeping John Harbaugh. And honestly, in some situations now, I even don't. But at this point, yeah, Big Germ saying this is what happens when a GM and head coach are next door neighbors. I don't know how much of an impact that has, but it is documented that those two are next to each other. Terry saying possibly not making the playoffs next year. I'm not going that far, Terry. I still think that, look, you have the core pieces of Lamar Jackson, Kyle Hamilton, Roquan Smith, Zay Flowers, et cetera, et cetera. I think that they're going to be okay in terms of playoffs. Now, losing Macdonald's a blow. I think if you don't hit on your defensive coordinator, it lowers your ceiling because coaching has just as big of an impact as the players. And you lost, again, one of the best young coaches in the league. I mean, for Macdonald, he has grown. He had growing moments. That Macdonald-Miami game, week 2 of last year, it was honestly both Macdonald and Kyle Hamilton's kind of like low point. We saw Macdonald played a little too soft with a big lead, and he learned from it. That's the adjustment aspect of it too. It's not just halftime adjustments and, oh, hey, we're going to do this in the second half. Macdonald learns. He takes in information, and some coaches just don't do that, where they're so stubborn and they stick to their guns. Well, this is what got me here, and I'm going to do this for however long I'm going to be a coach because this is what got me here. Macdonald understands that there are learning curves, there are nuances to certain games, and it's adjustments not only in halftime, but also it's in figuring out where can he get better, and he certainly was one of the best. Cordy saying, who's the favorite to our next defensive coordinator? We'll talk about it in a couple minutes more in depth, but if I had to give an initial thing, it's going to be one of Wilson or Weaver for me. I love Zach Orr, but I think that, in my opinion, those two guys have more experience, I guess. Wilson was going to be the Eagles defensive coordinator last year if they didn't hire Sean Desai, and Darius Slay wanted Wilson. Everybody in that Eagles organization, I think outside of the ownership and coaching staff, wanted Wilson as their defensive coordinator. All the players wanted him. So I think that Wilson is going to be a defensive coordinator somewhere. If he doesn't get the Ravens job, if it's Weaver and not Wilson, Wilson's going to go and be a defensive coordinator either for Macdonald in Seattle or somewhere else. You look at Weaver. I think if he doesn't get the defensive coordinator job, he'll follow Macdonald. So I think they're going to lose one of those two guys, and I don't know, maybe Zach Orr, but we're going to see as well. And Smoke and Jays, we'll talk about this in the final part of the show here, saying, do you think Macdonald will take Ravens players with him? We'll get to that in the final part of the show because I do think there are some opportunities for Ravens players to depart Baltimore and follow Macdonald to Seattle. So stay tuned. We got a lot to get to on this instant reaction live edition of Locked On Ravens. Again, talking Mike Macdonald leaving for the Seattle Seahawks. We'll be right back here on this episode of Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday, it's all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snack, and placing some super bets. And it's kind of hurtful still for me to talk about the Super Bowl after obviously the Ravens had that collapse and they're not in it anymore. But obviously the games are usually good. You got great food. The commercials are awesome too. And for me, if I'm looking at a bet I like on FanDuel, man, I'm taking Christian McCaffrey everything, because if the 49ers run the ball, anytime touchdown from McCaffrey, over from McCaffrey, if the 49ers run the ball, unlike a certain team in the AFC Championship on that Chiefs defense, I think there are going to be some big numbers from McCaffrey. And FanDuel has so many ways for you to end your season with a W, or maybe 2 or 3. Not only can you bet who won the Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more. A FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back. Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher. Talking Mike Macdonald, unfortunately leaving for the Seattle Seahawks, getting their head coaching opportunity over there. I mean, again, got to be happy for him in terms of circumstance. but it's a tough day for the Ravens organization as they lose. I'll say it all stream. I'll say it all tomorrow's episode. One of the best, if not the best, young defensive minds, young coaching minds in the NFL. If you're here with us today on the live show and you're checking and you like the content, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We do 5 days a week Ravens content, both YouTube and video form and audio form, Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever. So if you like the video on YouTube and subscribe, it helps put the show in front of more Ravens fans, more NFL fans, and you can check in. We do 5 days a week. In audio form, it's the same show, audio and video. So if you want to subscribe over there as well, really appreciate the communities we've built, whether it's social media or here in video form, audio form, the whole 9 yards. So let's get into the initial replacements. And I saw, I lost the comment for a second here. I see, I'm trying to find it. Here we go. Do we think Macdonald will bring Ravens players with him to Seattle? Do we think he'll take Ravens players over to Seattle? I mean, if we're being real, if you want the answer that I want to say no, but the realistic answer is probably. I mean, I just think that Macdonald has the players in that system, and you have, like, this is one of the biggest free agency periods for the Ravens ever in terms of talent that they could lose. I think the Ravens are going to have to decide to keep one of Queen or Matabike. My answer to that would be Matabike, and then I think Queen maybe follows Macdonald to Seattle. Maybe you get Geno Stone to Seattle, and he's a guy. Maybe Clowney goes back or Van Noy goes over there. There are players that could follow Macdonald over there, much like there are probably going to be coaches. And at the time of this recording, I don't know if any coaches have followed him over yet, but I don't know. We're gonna see how it all plays out for him. And I'm kind of trying to peruse through Twitter, but I do think the Ravens will look. They're going to be okay. It doesn't feel like that right now. It doesn't feel like it at all. But I do think they're going to be fine because they have been in this situation before where they have lost good defensive coordinators and they have responded with bringing in other good defensive coordinators. But it does not take away the magnitude of this loss for the Ravens, because if I sat here and told you, oh, there's plenty of other Mike Macdonalds out there, there's not. There's not. You know, there are plenty of other good candidates for defensive coordinator out there, such as Anthony Weaver, Denard Wilson, Zach Orr, etc. But for me, I don't necessarily know where the Ravens will go in terms of which guy they bring in, because if they bring in one guy, they're going to lose the other guy, right? That's just my opinion. And there are plenty of other defensive coordinator jobs out there. If Macdonald hires Orr as a defensive coordinator, I think both Weaver and Wilson are gone. I think Wilson has plenty of opportunities outside of Seattle, and Weaver has a couple as well. So we're going to see. I think Weaver has even like the head coaching job, right? Maybe Weaver gets the Commanders head. Okay. If you're talking about worst case scenario, that would be it. McDonald's already going for Seattle. Anthony Weaver gets the Commanders job. And then you're talking about both guys taking players and coaches from the Ravens. So that to me is where I'm kind of talking about the worst situations now. And I don't necessarily see where, there are silver linings here and there, but look, the overall mood today is that this is not a good day. The Ravens lost this. Anai saying, I think Michigan defensive coordinator would be good. Just keep going to Michigan. So Anai, the Michigan defensive coordinator, actually followed Jim Harbaugh. So Jesse Minter, who was the Ravens, he was with the Ravens for a while, kind of like Mike Macdonald. He went to Michigan to be their defensive coordinator, and Jesse Minter actually followed Jim Harbaugh to Los Angeles. So that's not an option for him anymore. You can't do that. It would have been a great option if it happened, but the Ravens can no longer dip in that Michigan train because, Harbaugh's gone, and he took a lot of those Michigan he took at least the one that I would want in Jesse Minter to Los Angeles with him. I see Bailey just finished up the morning show. And if you missed that, Bailey, I appreciate you first of all, but we had Sean Merriman on the show for today's morning episode. We talked about how the Ravens can bounce back. He gives a little insight on history. He's a Maryland guy, right? Maryland legend, grew up in Maryland, went to Maryland. So we talked a lot about that. So be sure to check out our episode with Sean Merriman, maybe after you're finished watching or listening to this episode. Black Daniel saying, appreciate you, KO. Appreciate you, Black Daniel, checking in here. Let's see. We had a ton of comments, and I really appreciate all the support. Let's see. Man, a lot of Seattle fans in here. And look, if you're a Seattle Seahawks fan checking in today, first of all, appreciate you tuning into the stream or listening or watching after the fact. But this is a home run, slam dunk hire. I think that's why so many people in Baltimore are so upset about it, is because, one, there's a lot of discontent with John Harbaugh right now and just where he is in terms of the graces of the fan base, where we can acknowledge that Baltimore has not lived up to expectations over the course of the season, over the course of really since they won the Super Bowl. I mentioned it earlier in the show. I believe it's 2 playoff wins since they won the Super Bowl. They just made the AFC Championship for the first time since they won the Super Bowl, and it's a step in the right direction. But with a team like that, with a team that the Ravens had this season, with how dominant they were the best team in the NFL, and to lose like that, to abandon your identity on the offensive side of the ball, John Harbaugh has to sign off on he's the head guy. Mike Macdonald, his defense was not looking good in the first half, but guess what? Halftime adjustments, which we've seen from Mike Macdonald all season. If you're a Seattle fan, you have to love that. You have to love the defense coming out in the second half. And the Chiefs had 6 possessions in the second half. Punt, 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 end of game. Macdonald adjusted. And did the Chiefs get a little conservative? Yeah. I think they were trying to run clock, keep Lamar off the field. And that's one of the strategies you can use. But after a really rough first half, Macdonald adjusted and figured out what he wanted. So I think for me, Baltimore loses a good young coach. And I see ZMG saying you're the best guy at breaking things down I've watched. I appreciate you. I appreciate you, ZMG, for checking in. And I see you're a Seahawks fan, so I guess congratulations. It's almost like, the video, if you've seen it, of the guy like crying, congratulations. Like he's sad in the whole. I mean, I'm sad for it, but again, for any Seahawks fans in there, you're getting a good one. A lot of Seahawks fans wanted, and I saw it on social media too. A lot of Seahawks fans wanted this. I think Seahawks fans zeroed in on Mike Macdonald after going through the coaching carousel here. They zeroed in on Macdonald, and this is like a hallelujah day for them, because this was the guy that they wanted. This was their guy. And I know that, moving off of Pete Carroll was a little shocking to some, maybe outside of Seattle, but maybe some in the organization, some of the fans, they kind of saw it coming. And I see from oldest to youngest head coach kind of a shift there. But I do see SW Lions saying Harbaugh has a neck for finding good coaches. He does. I think that Harbaugh, in building coaching staffs, for the most part, I think Greg Roman is maybe, keeping on to him as maybe the outlier. But assistant coaching-wise, he has more hits than misses, I'll say. There are some misses in there. I'm not going to say it's not, but I'm not there. And I see what are Macdonald's strengths and weaknesses. I do think that, there are some moments in games where he gets a little too conservative or too aggressive in situations, but that to me really is the biggest weakness of him, where he can go one way or the other and not necessarily know, right, that it's too conservative or too aggressive. But I think he's gotten better at that. Whereas the strengths, I mean, you can go all across the board here. His players love him. And that's, I think, another thing too, right? The players love John Harbaugh. The players love Mike Macdonald too. He's a player's coach, but I think the adjustments is what gives me the most optimism if I'm a Seattle fan, because look, games don't go the way you expect sometimes, right? Games happen, and in the start of the game, something goes wrong or something happens you don't expect. And you can't just say, okay, we're going to stick to the very generic game plan we put together, and that's all we're going to stick to. You got to adjust, and I think whoever he brings in is going to have that same mentality as well. So I think it's an issue too, where if you're Baltimore, you have to understand that you're going to keep the system, but the play calling is going to be different, right? It's not Mike Macdonald calling those plays anymore, so it's going to be a different play caller now, and that, I think, I don't know, gives fans a little pause here. I see Imagine saying Stroud, Herbert, Burrow will all be right there next year, better than this year. Raiders also have a new quarterback, actual competent coaching, Rodgers, and you can already see Lamar getting blamed. And this is what I talked about with Sean yesterday on when I had Sean Merriman on. I said, look, it's so hard to win in the NFL, and that's why it's so disappointing the Ravens didn't win this year, because like Jadeveon Clowney said, they had the team this year, and they didn't get it done. And now they're going to have to – this is going to be a tough offseason in a lot of different ways. It'll be good in some certain situations, right? I think the draft will be good, and they'll bring in some guys. But it's going to be tough. It already has been tough because you're going to lose guys like Mike Macdonald. You're going to lose players probably like a Patrick Queen or Justin Madubuike. You're going to have to reset on this whole – reset's a bad word. You're going to have to retool and figure out what goes into this next thing. So I just think it's frustrating. I see I'm trying to stick up on all these comments here. It's we got so many in here. I see Tanya. I appreciate you checking in, Tanya, saying now we're stuck with Harbaugh and Todd. I don't feel optimistic at all. Look, Harbaugh's not leaving this year. And Tanya, I agree, where those two are going to return. But this is, for me, the year for John Harbaugh. If there's anything, here it is, right? AFC Championship is fun. Making you're not going to fire a coach that makes the Super Bowl. If you make the AFC Championship again, if you're John Harbaugh and you lose, to me, there's no justification, because the justification this year, if there's any, which again, I don't agree with, is, okay, well, they made the AFC Championship game. They haven't made it that far in the Lamar era. So, okay, we're going to keep him to see if you can move up the ladder again next year to make the Super Bowl or win it. If it's anything other than making the Super Bowl next year, there's no justification, because at this point, you're wasting years of Lamar's prime. You're wasting years right now where primes for everybody are different, but you're wasting a year. You're wasting a year and a year and a year. And that, to me, is where the complacency thing comes in as well. So that where it is. Again, I don't think he's a bad coach, but sometimes 10 years just go and figure that out. And you figure out, look, a tenure isn't what it was. John Harbaugh's tenure early on was awesome. I still think it's been good. I still think it's been a fine John Harbaugh tenure. But for the playoffs, the Ravens have been a great regular season team. But you don't play the game for the regular season. You play it for the playoffs. You play it to win the Super Bowl. And it's just been too much playoff inconsistency. And I see Kobe checking in, saying Macdonald having Witherspoon, Woolen, Diggs, and Love. That's just tremendous secondary. It's only going to be better. Yeah, I mean, and you can work off of that. Bring in Patrick Queen to that defense. I think, with Boye Mafe and some of those guys over there too, they have young pieces. You can bring in a veteran or two. It's going to be, Macdonald is in a good situation. And that, to me, is why, again, I don't think Macdonald would have left for just any organization, for any situation, right? It had to be a perfect fit with the perfect contract, perfect roster for him to leave a situation like Baltimore. And I mean, look, I think Seattle is that place for him. So I'm happy for Mike Macdonald. I'm not happy for the Ravens that they lost him. I think it's a tough blow for the Ravens organization. And we're going to have to see how they respond. We're going to be back here tomorrow, though, on Locked On Ravens. If you're a Seahawks fan, we're going to talk more about Mike Macdonald tomorrow. Obviously, if you're a Ravens fan, you know the deal here on Locked On Ravens. It'll be initial candidates. Again, I think Weaver, Wilson, and Orr will be the three. But we'll talk a little bit more about who the initial favorite should be. Should they go internal or external for the hire, and a lot more. We got so much to break down here on Locked On Ravens. If you're new to the channel, if you like the content, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It helps out me a ton. Also in audio form, if you're new to the show, be sure to follow along, whether you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the whole 9 yards. I really appreciate it. If you're an everydayer, really appreciate you checking in with me here. Kind of an impromptu live stream here. Wish we didn't have to do this live stream, but Mike Macdonald leaves. If you're somewhere in the middle, you see yourself coming back to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you're already coming back, you might as well, right? You might as well do it. So the support's been awesome. We're going to have 5 days a week plus bonus content in the offseason here. Ravens coverage daily for you. Appreciate everybody checking in. We'll be right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens, breaking down more Mike Macdonald. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.